people want to do good in the world, and it takes money to do these things, like these hospitals that you're talking about, and the oxygen and the programs and the serving. That takes a lot of money, and it takes funding to do that. And so if we can look at it as we are giving people an opportunity to serve in a way that maybe they can't be on the front lines doing the work in the hospitals. They're not trained, they can't travel, they can't be in those locations, whatever, but they want to make a difference on those causes. And so we are being the connector for them to help those causes that they care about. Hey friends, welcome back. One of my favorite things to do in this work that I do is strategy calls, whether it's with grant writers or nonprofits. I love helping them think through their next steps and the strategy of that, but then also backing up and just boiling it down to, okay, what are your next couple of action steps that you're going to do in the next few days? So that is what I'm doing on today's episode. Now, if you have not watched my TEDx talk, you might want to go do that because that will give some context for some of the things we're talking about today. And please help me share that. Let's spread the word. Let's educate nonprofits about how they can truly build a better ROI around grant writing. Today's guest had reached out because she is interested in grant writing. She has a great background, which she'll share with us. And she and her husband are doing some really incredible work internationally. They have really felt called to Africa and to help the communities there. He is a doctor, and they're both very involved in the hospitals and just becoming immersed in the culture and helping and seeing the needs. And I love her heart for serving and for what she's wanting to do through the power of grant writing. So we talked through some different ideas. She has some great questions, some super practical things of how does she get started, how to approach potential nonprofits, how to know if they have what it takes to handle grants. And so these are important questions that we need to sit down and ask ourselves and look at objectively and not with rose-colored glasses as we're going into a situation. We can't necessarily force a potential nonprofit or a client to do something that they themselves are not ready to step up and do. So I'm really glad that Silvia got into some of these questions, and she's thinking very deeply and strategically. So I'm excited for her, and I'm excited for you to hear this conversation because a lot of you come to me with some of these same questions. How do I start? How do I know if I'm grant ready? How do I get past the fear of writing that first application and not knowing if I'm going to get it or not? Let me tell you, that is perfectly normal. We all go through that. And, speaking of that, I am doing some new things this year too that are exciting and a big stretch for me. And I mean, just last year I did the TEDx talk. Oh my goodness. I never thought I would do that. Starting the podcast was huge 2 years ago. So, it's all about stretching, continuing to improve and making ourselves better, right? So that we can serve better and help others fulfill their missions. So, whatever it is you're working through, I hope today's conversation helps you and gives you some ideas and inspiration of how to move forward. Reach out if I can ever help. But in the meantime, check out this conversation, and here we go. Silvia, welcome to the show. Before we get started, say your name for us so that we can hear it pronounced correctly, because I know with my Midwest accent, I'm messing it up completely.
Okay, it's not a problem at all. But in Italy, we pronounce it Silvia.
Okay, that's a beautiful name. And welcome. It's so good to have you. And I'm really
Thank you.
excited to dig in today because I know you have some deep vision and plans for how you can help nonprofits and a really interesting background and work that you're doing as far as your travels and your work with your husband. So let's get started.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be chatting with you tonight.
Yeah. So tell us just a little quick recap of what you had shared with me beforehand in your form about the work you're doing and your deeper reason for wanting to get into grant writing, because I think that's just really compelling. And it comes back to having that important core why.
So I have lived abroad for many years. So I moved abroad from Italy the first time when I was 18, grew up just with my family having an interest in international work. My first international volunteering experience was at 14 years old. So I kind of grew up with it. And then I studied Chinese in university, moved to China. Volunteered in Hong Kong. I lived in Hong Kong and China for a number of years and eventually met my husband while I was working in Hong Kong. He is a Colombian-born American, and we realized that we shared an interest for international work, and he eventually decided to go into medicine, always with the idea of doing working in a medical mission eventually. And that was something that I had also been considering, not the medical side of things, but I was planning on, I wasn't thinking about getting married or having kids, and I was working hard in Hong Kong, and I was planning on working for a few more years and then go off and work for a nonprofit somewhere. So met my husband, we eventually got married and kind of worked through um, medical school, residency, and then we came to the point where residency was done with residency. We had two little boys at that point. This is just a few months ago, and we decided that he was going to pursue a global health fellowship. And so, with the fellowship, we had the opportunity to um, travel to Africa for a total of about 7 months this year. And we're going to be in three countries. So we started in Ethiopia for 2 months. We're now in Kenya for another 2 months. And we're moving on to Uganda soon. So he is working at two mission hospitals and one state-run hospital in Uganda. And we came with the idea of preparing for long-term work in Africa. So I had never been to Africa before. My husband had. He had volunteered in Togo before. I just loved to be here. He's very he just feels a connection with the culture, with the music, and so he's very interested in working in Africa. And I was, very happy to give it a try. And so we came, and it has been just an incredible learning experience for all of us. And in my professional experience in mostly in China and Hong Kong, and then also in the US, has been in recruitment and human resources. Um, but since kind of having my children and after my second child, I stopped working, I started developing an interest in agriculture, especially on regenerative agriculture. And once I came to Africa, I really made an effort to go out and meet people that work in NGOs. And there is so much happening in the NGO sphere here. And so I did meet organizations that work in the agricultural sector, and it just becomes so obvious of how farming is part of life here for everybody, and how it is just a fundamental part of people's livelihoods. And so it kind of connects with everything else that people do in this part of the world. And it was fascinating for me and just gave me a lot of food for thought. And I just became more and more interested in the work of all of these different organizations. And I understood how agriculture relates to nutrition and to, of course, livelihoods and environmental protection, which is very important in very practical ways. And I may come back to this later, talking about some of the hospitals that we visited. So I ended up, contacting people, visiting different organizations. And then one of the first organizations that we met is run by the Cabrinian Sisters, which is an order of Catholic nuns who have a beautiful project in a rural area in southern Ethiopia where there is a pocket of malnutrition. So it's a very poor area, and there's an hospital nearby, and they just saw so many malnourished children coming to the hospital, and they would be treated, they would get better, and then they would go home, and in a few months they would come back and they would be malnourished again. And so the sisters started this program where it's a residential program. The children come and stay for a few months after having been stabilized at the hospital, and while the children are there, the mothers also stay there and learn life skills and business skills. And the sisters help them open a bank account and learn how to start saving. And they let them use some of the mission land to farm. And then they buy some of their produce to cook for the schools and for the hospital. And so since they started this program, they have seen how families have been able to start supporting themselves. In some cases, they give them sort of like a small starting capital to start a small business, selling eggs, selling bananas, just a small business that can get the family out of, extreme poverty. And the children are not coming back malnourished like they were before. And so I was so touched and so impressed. And I asked the sister, what are your biggest needs right now? And just like I saw her, the look on her face of like grave concern. And what she told me was, if we had more money, we could just help more families. And so that just like really, I just like, it touched me so deeply. And I was like, I want to get money for the sisters so that they can continue to do their work. And then I learned that being a registered NGO in Ethiopia, they work through the government, they have to present plans, and they are way under budget compared to what they were hoping to be able to do. With COVID, some of the funding from Italy have dried up, and so they were very much based on, I believe, very much based on individual donations or, kind of like smaller donations coming from a number of different sources. And I just thought there must be grants out there for this kind of work. And it was something that I had never at all crossed my mind or considered before. But since then, I was just, wow, this is a thing that I could do. And I know I write well. I believe, I probably have the skills to do this, and this could really make a difference. And then kind of through that lens, I started noticing things, and comparing organizations that have the ability of applying and receiving grants compared to other organizations that don't. And I don't know if you would like me to stop here for a second or going straight into my comparison between the two hospitals that I mentioned to you before. But it is, I just realized this has a lot of potential.
Mm-hmm.
And so I decided I was going to pursue it.
Yes, what an adventure, and what an incredible way to really get in and see firsthand the need and also the impact in the program that's in place. And I really want to point that out because a lot of people come to me wanting to know how to get grants for an idea or for something that they're thinking about starting, or they're maybe just in the early stages of forming and it could work, but they don't have any money yet. So let's get a grant for it. So I just want to point out that you are looking at a program that's already in place. It's already making an impact. It's already seeing results and helping people. And basically, in the business world, we'd say it's proof of concept. It's proof that the program is working, but there's a huge need to expand it. So that's an ideal situation to start looking at grants, looking at, okay, they have this program, it's working, it's helping people, they have the model set up and established. So how can we help them expand it? And I just want to point that out, that that really is a good place to be. And also, the other piece is you said, what is your biggest need? And then you listened to what they said. You didn't just go in and try to start pointing things out and telling them. You asked those open questions and you let them share and you listened. And sometimes that is our first step that we need to take. People come to me saying, where do I start? How do I do this? Sometimes it's a matter of asking questions and listening. So, first of all, I think you're absolutely on the right track and you're looking for the right things. So, well done on that piece.
Thank you. So it may not be totally applicable in this case, but I'm sure I mean, partly to this, in this case or other organizations that I've seen, if I come as an outsider, I haven't worked for the organization, I haven't necessarily seen, or I may not have the chance to like spend a lot, an entire week with them to see how they do things. How do I know that they are doing things efficiently and that they are ready to ask for a grant if I have no real way of assessing how they do things like day to day and how they use their funds?
Mm-hmm.
What would be your suggestions?
Yeah, I would say first, building that relationship, like you've talked about, is important, as opposed to just going in and trying to push yourself and sell yourself of, hey, buy my grant writing services. But first, go in and get to know them and let them get to know you and realize, okay, she truly has a heart for helping us and she cares about our mission. And probably they are so busy working on the mission itself and in those front
Yes,
lines of service that they don't have a lot of time to think about how can we apply for these grants and spend time on all this research and paperwork. And they probably don't have the expertise to know where to look or how to
absolutely.
go about
Yes.
it.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, they probably would welcome having an expert come in to help them. Even just if you know a little bit more than them, you're more of an expert than they are. And so having that in place would probably be helpful. If you have at all the chance to visit on site at least once, which it sounds like you have in some of these cases, but getting to know them in person, walking through firsthand to see for yourself will really help you convey the story in a much more powerful way and be able to really highlight or pinpoint some of the struggles, challenges, things going well that they might not think to tell you or that they might not even realize is unusual or
Mm-hmm.
that is a struggle. So have you been to this hospital that you've referenced yourself?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So,
Okay.
so this is actually a good example. So, we were living at, and my husband was working at Soda Christian Hospital, which is a wonderful, wonderful hospital run by an American organization. I believe it's called the St. Luke Foundation, and they do amazing work. They have a number of American doctors that not only treat patients, but also work very hard on training the local doctors, and so they are really developing very strong local doctors. And this hospital is very well run and has the ability to apply for grants, and they regularly get grants, and they also they are able to get large grants, and they are growing their services and their ability to to serve the population in the area. And then there is this other mission hospital about an hour away, who is almost it's the total opposite. It started. It's not the old hospital, so it has it started off maybe about 20 years ago. Started off well, had some substantial funding from Italy, from some certain organizations in Italy. And then I don't know what happened. There were, some issues, and some of the funding stopped from Italy. And so the hospital is in difficult position right now. And they, I'm sure also, are busy taking care of patients and don't have the ability to, don't have a person that could be in charge of just spending their time on writing grants, and just I don't believe they have the capacity of doing that right now. And for example, their oxygen plant, which they were the first hospital in the area to have an oxygen plant, has been broken for 2 years. And so
Ah,
they have a neonatal unit. They have, like newborns that need oxygen. They have malaria patients. They have, it is life-saving.
mhm,
They need the oxygen, and, getting it from elsewhere is an incredible feat. They don't, there isn't even a paved road that goes to the hospital. It's, it's dirt road. So it's, and the same thing, like I was thinking, wow, like these guys just need, there must be grants out there for something like this, to fix, to replace an oxygen plant for a hospital. But then, we had the short visit, we talked to the people, but then through knowing, from getting to know other people, you start hearing comments about some management issues, and some potential corruption, and all of these, things that you don't know if they're true, but they are very concerning. And so,
mhm,
how, my this I where and I getting to really find, how do you really find out what is happening, and how would they manage the money that they get? And is
mhm,
it my responsibility to say, well, if you get the grant, but you don't use it completely in the way you should, if there is some money wasted, should that stop me from trying and help and help them apply, or not? These are kind of, and I'm not even thinking
mhm,
about being paid right now. I'm thinking, if I was if I was trying to help as a volunteer. These are questions that I can't quite wrap my head around.
mhm.
Do you have an
Yeah, and
opinion?
those are tough. Yeah, that's tough because part of helping a nonprofit to be successful with grants is making sure they're ready for grants, which meaning, like from my TEDx talk, I talked about, is it relevant? Is there a need? Do you have the research and statistics to back it up? And have you found a funder looking to fulfill that type of need in the community? So finding that relevant match between those things and that intersection. Is it optimized? Meaning, are their operations running smoothly? Are they managing money well? Do they have their internal processes in place so that they do have that capacity for grants? And then, third, are they interacting and building relationships that are authentic and helpful and collaborating with others in the community doing similar work? And so, those three
Mm-hmm.
things really need to be in place to get the true return and set up for success with grants. So, with what you're saying, that is a tough situation because, on the one hand, you see this huge need. They are doing the services and have that track record of we're serving people, we're doing the best we can, funding is tight, we have this broken machine. We can do so much more if we had a new machine or had this fixed. On the other hand, if there's questions and cloudiness around their credibility and can they manage these funds well, that's going to raise an eyebrow and that's going to be a red flag for funders. And that's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
So that probably sounds like it would take some more detective work on your part and some homework to figure out, are there people within the organization that are trustworthy and have integrity and are managing the place with credibility? Or is it just too
Mm-hmm.
much doubt around this is not a good investment. Because just like with a business, when an investor is looking at, should I invest money in this business to get a return? Grant makers are the same way. Should we invest in this nonprofit? Can they handle the money well? Is it going to maximize the impact of the funding? To be able to get that return on impact instead of investment. And the trust really comes in as a big piece there. So I would do some more homework on that if you are able to. And if it sounds like the first one you mentioned, the one where it's malnutrition and they've created the residential program, that's the one that it sounds like it's pretty stable and credible,
Yes,
correct?
I think
Okay.
so. Yes.
So it's the other one with the oxygen plant that's broken that we're not sure about their operations and financial management, right? So we've got two
Yes,
separate.
correct. Yes,
Okay.
they're two separate entities. Yes.
Okay. So then for your part, you could go a couple of ways. I would recommend starting with the one that's more credible, the one that has the program in place, the residential program, and the moms are staying with them, learning the skills and creating this business ecosystem for a couple of reasons. One, you've got the program in place and running, and definitely a need to expand it, but you've got proof that it's working. Also, you've got several opportunities there for different types of funding. Like you could research grants for this residential program for kids and nourishment and better education around how to be healthy, how to eat well, providing
hmm
food. Also, you could go more of the economic route or teaching these life skills and business and entrepreneurship to the parents. Also, you mentioned the agriculture and even just the economy that is impacting. So, really, there are several different categories of grants there that you could possibly research, which opens up more possibilities for funding, as opposed to if it were just one area. You've got several ways you could go. So, if you feel like they are managing their money well and have a good reputation in the community, and the program is going well, then that might be the one I would start with. And that way
Right.
you also can start building a relationship with them, start exploring opportunities, building a track record there of potential grants, because again, they probably don't have the time or expertise to really focus on pursuing the grant funding like they could. If you can bring that piece to it, then that could really help them. And then that also can help build your experience and skills as a grant writer and knowing how to develop those. And then, as far as you also mentioned, how do you come in as the outsider to know that they're grant ready and to know that they have what they need without spending a week on site? I have always worked, I say almost always worked remotely with clients, or at least not on site. I have never worked in their office. I have gone to visit for a couple hours at a time. I've gone and made site visits or met with them separately. Even now, the last couple years, only virtually with some clients. And it still works, but there are certain key pieces that I look for. And I can link to some past episodes where I've talked about this, and I have a download about this of certain things to look for grant readiness. And that would help you know going in what to ask for, what kinds of information to gather. And then you can start to evaluate, okay, how grant ready are they? What's missing? And how can we make sure they have those pieces in place? For example, do they have all their paperwork in order? You said they are a registered NGO. So, assuming that they have all those documents gathered and organized and everything on hand, they don't have to go hunt it down. Are their finances in order? Is their budget kept and well tracked and organized? Or do they need some help getting that cleaned up? Do they
Mm.
have a good, solid board and management team? Or do they just have 3 or 4 board members that aren't very involved? If that's the case, they probably need to work on growing that core leadership. So things like that you can come in and start to look at and recommend. And then at the same time, you can be talking with them and working with them to identify what are your biggest needs. And then you can research what funding opportunities are out there that match up with those needs, not to twist things out of shape, but to look for the ones that are really wanting to do that type of work in the communities and in that geographic area, and then finding those matches, and you can go from there.
Right. Yeah, I guess there's so many steps involved. With being
Yeah.
here, it's first of all, I need to learn what the rules for NGOs are in different countries. In the country I'm looking at, I mean, like, do they have a board? What does it look like? And really, I guess, get my head around all of these different things. And one of my other questions for you, in a way, is how do you get over the fear of the first time that you're going through this process, and that feeling that you're never going to know enough to just go ahead and and tell them, I can do this for you.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
It's a big question for me.
Yeah, I mean, that is so common. And I will tell you, there are still projects where I feel like I don't know enough for this. I'm not an expert enough. And I've done it for almost 20 years. So that is common, but it's important to take the first step and to be learning, like you said, which it sounds like to me you are willing to learn and dig in and figure out the ins and outs. So in your case, I would maybe pick one of these areas and one of these locations to start. Like, say you picked this hospital that you said is in rural Ethiopia. Maybe start just there. Don't try to learn all 3 countries or 4 or 5 countries at once. Just figure out, okay, for this location in Ethiopia, what are the requirements here? What are the opportunities available? What kind of funding are they getting? How do we go about navigating that? So just focus on one area instead of trying to learn all the places. And maybe you'd prefer
Right.
to learn the area where you're going to be living next so that you
Yeah.
can start to build a local relationship. But whatever it is, I would pick your one spot to start. And you're looking at this as a learning opportunity and a learning process. You don't have to start as the expert. You don't have to go into it knowing everything. And especially because you're willing to volunteer and you are wanting to help them, you have such a heart to serve, which I think is a beautiful thing. And if you have the time and resources available to do that, you can approach them that way and approach them with that and say, I know you have these needs. I want to help. Tell me, like you asked that question, tell me your biggest need. What is it that you need help with the most? What kind of resource would be the most useful to you? How would you use the money if you had a big donation come in? So questions like that, you're learning about them. And then that will help you craft your next steps to figure out how to go forward. And then if over time, you're building this relationship with them and talking to them about the grants and the opportunities out there, you can just be very upfront with them and say, I love this work. I have good experience in HR, recruitment, organizations. I'm a good writer. I want to help you with grants. This is new to me, so I'm learning. But if you're willing to work together, I want to learn and I want to help you. And they understand that. I mean, I think it would be a no-brainer for them. And I like to start with more smaller, simple foundation grants, especially if you're new, as opposed to big government grants. I don't know how the African government grants would work, but I know here in the US, the federal grants are pretty intense. The paperwork, the research, the requirements, it's intense. The foundation grants are typically much, much more simple. So if you started with something like that, you're starting with a much easier process, but it allows you to learn the process and to learn how it works, the steps, the different requirements, how to put the application together, how to write it in a way that is effective and compelling. And it gives you a chance to practice and build your muscles. When the stakes are lower, your time requirement is lower. And it's going to feel kind of clunky at first. It may feel awkward and reading through, But if you just follow the guidelines, they'll tell you exactly what they want, exactly what you need to do. And if it says, this needs to be less than 500 words, you keep it to that. If it says, we want to see this and this and this in your budget, or we want this paperwork, you follow everything they say and just follow the directions exactly, answer their questions thoroughly, read it back through and make sure you've answered every question. But you're looking at those first few grants as a learning opportunity. And you're approaching the nonprofit that way of, I want to learn this. I want to be able to help you by doing this. Will you let me work with you so that I can learn and have the opportunity to practice and try to help you get more funding? And I would just, own it, own that you're a good writer. This piece of your writing is new to you, and it's a skill set you really want to expand so we can help nonprofits like you get the funding you need and position it so that it's a no-brainer. Like, yeah, of course we need help with that. If you're new, everybody's got to start somewhere. So yeah, we'd love the help. I would think they would jump at that.
Generally speaking, how labor intensive is it on the part of the leadership of the NGO, or the one person that is gonna work with you in the NGO?
That's a good question. It depends on the project. Again, government grants are going to be a lot more intense. Your first
Mm-hmm.
few grants may be a little more because you're going to need a lot of information from them. You can't just make it
Right.
up. You have to talk with them to find out, what are your numbers like? Tell me about your program. Walk me through the steps. Or I'd like to come have a tour of your facility and hear about your work firsthand. So the first few, you're going to be doing a lot of information gathering that ideally you'll be able to reuse that on future applications. But at first, it is more intensive and you're going to need responses from them pretty quickly, especially if there's a deadline. But once you have
Mm-hmm.
some of that initial collected there, then it won't take quite as much from them in future applications, usually. However, if the funds are awarded, then the implementation is going to be really important. They're going to need to understand what are the goals and objectives that we are expected to track, and they need to be tracking that information and that data along the way. What is the budget and how is it supposed to be used? And they need to track how they're spending it and making sure they're doing it according to the application. And so, especially on your first few, I would try to make sure you're designing the project in a way that it fits well with what they're doing so that it's not a huge lift on top of their current work. It can just be a nice extension to help expand it naturally. Like your hospital program with the kids that you mentioned, if you were to all of a sudden get a grant to add a school, that's going to be a huge lift. They're going to have to find a building and teachers and curriculum and furniture and all the things to make a school run. So that would be
Right.
a big undertaking on top of they're probably already overloaded. But if you had a grant for that program and you were able to, say, provide clothing along with the food, then they are already feeding the kids well. But this clothing would be a natural extension because it fits with what they're doing. It just enhances already and doesn't require a whole different set of programming. It just expands the work they're doing right now.
Right. I guess an important part that would have to be discussed beforehand is not only, okay, let's get all the documents in place, let me understand how you do things now, but really, if you get the money, do you have, how are you going to use it? And do you have the time to manage and to fulfill the reporting requirements and
Yes.
and all of that side of things?
Right.
Right.
Yes, that's
Yes, I.
important to ask them up front. And it's also important to clarify up front. Will they handle it once the grant's awarded, or will you be a part of monitoring the timelines, sending reminders, saying, hey, we have a report due next month on the 15th. Can we start
Right.
gathering the information? And then are you going to help write the report if they send you, say, the attendance count, the impact they're making, the updated numbers and stories, testimonials, the difference it's making? If they send it to you, are you putting together the report? So I would clarify that up front as well, just partly for your own purposes of, okay, where does my job end and their responsibility begins versus do you
Yes.
want to be involved in the full process?
Right. Right. Mm-hmm.
And then
So,
again, the smaller grants won't have as much requirement on that end as the larger government grants. And it also depends. Like I have one client that if we get equipment for exercise classes or for teachers to add new classes, that's different than if we just get equipment for, say, a new freezer for their food. I mean, the freezer, it's just a matter of we buy it, install it, we're good to go. The classes, that's more of we need to track attendance, we need to find teachers, we need to talk to the people and get their feedback. Are they feeling better? Are they exercising more? Those types of things. So it's a little more involved of a program. So it also
right,
depends
right,
on
right, right,
the type of program.
right. Mm-hmm. Okay. Another important question, at least I think it's important for me to understand how. So I am thinking um, there probably is more opportunity for funding coming from the US compared to, other countries. And, never mind, let's not even talking about within Ethiopia where there's a war going on. So I'm sure there's very little funding within Ethiopia. So we're looking at, foreign funding. How important is it for the NGO to have a solid and sleek online presence?
That's a good question. Do they have an online presence right now?
Well, right now, my understanding is that they are migrating websites. So there is, right at this moment, there is no website that I could, but there was just like it was kind of like a side, like a mention in one of the websites of the congregation mention about this program, but they do not for sure have any kind of significant online presence.
Okay. In that
Hopefully they will
case,
soon.
sure. And if say, let's assume they don't have one at all. I
Yeah,
mean, in this day and age, it's becoming more and more important just because people do go and look them up on a website.
of
If
course.
they are, yeah, if they're in between though, like in what you're saying, or if they just don't have one, if someone, is listening that doesn't have a site yet, I would say, could you at least get up a one page, sort of like a brochure landing page? Or could you create either a LinkedIn or Facebook business page just to
Oh,
populate
I
and
see.
have some information, some contact to serve as a website for now until you get one in place? That would be a much quicker thing that a volunteer could handle as opposed to trying to build an entire website with 5 or 10 pages and links and all the extra things that go along with that. Is there something
Yes.
simple to at least give a credible presence, contact information, pictures, stories, examples of what's happening, just to share about the work and to establish more credibility?
All right. Okay. So if you had to pick one, LinkedIn or Facebook?
Depends on your audience and depends on who your target
Okay.
is for who you want to convey it to and who you're trying to reach. For example, if you are trying to reach more of the business community, LinkedIn. If you're trying to reach
Okay.
more of the clients you're serving or families or maybe stay at home moms or something like that, probably Facebook. So,
Hmm.
it depends, or you could do a simple page of each and have,
Right.
a lot of
Hmm.
duplicate information and links and photos, but at least then have that available.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
These are
So
great
yeah,
questions, and you're thinking through really well.
I mean this is scary and it's exciting and I just hope that I have the courage to go ahead and do these things, whether it's going to be with this
Yes.
particular organization, whether it's going to be, I'm thinking we are going, we are right now looking for the hospitals where we are going to be based at. And I am, I know from my experience now, I know that once we find the place where we want to be, I will find things for me to do, like whether it's an established NGO, whether it's through programs that the hospital has, and that could be my place that I will start writing grant applications for.
Hmm.
And so, part of that, understanding and getting to know them and see how things, if things are done properly, will be easier. But it's kind of like a new world that opened up to me. But I just wanted to share another really touching example of how grants make a difference. So there's at Southern Christian Hospital, there's a wonderful American doctor. Her name is Michelle Yates, and she has become the de facto neonatologist at Southern Christian Hospital, though she's a family trained doctor. And she is extremely smart, extremely hardworking, and has helped the other hospital that I was talking about, that is about an hour away, to create their own neonatal unit. And she has personally trained the staff there, and she was taking her staff. She's wanted to take her staff to a neonatology conference in Tanzania, which involves flights and visas and expenses for the stay. And she applied for a grant from a foundation that they work regularly with, and she got the grant, so she was able to take her own staff. And then like being able to to have this funding to take her staff, she was able to then go get some extra donations, or I don't know, maybe her own money, to take one person from the other hospital and invite them to come to the same conference. And so additionally, the extra layer, adding the extra layer of training for this hospital that is so much lacking of funding compared to Southern Christian Hospital. So it's just like it's such a beautiful world out there of
Yeah, that's
things that
amazing.
happen once the
Hmm.
funding is there. And I
Yeah.
guess I never had an interest in money. I always felt very awkward about fundraising, etc. But I feel a lot more strongly about this idea of grants. In a way, it's slightly
Mhm.
less personal. I don't have to go out and ask my friends for money, but
Right.
I can go through a process and maybe really really help in a significant way. So it is
Mhm.
very exciting.
You bring up an interesting point there that maybe it would be a good podcast topic sometime about money and our thoughts around money, and asking for money sometimes can feel awkward. But if we reframe that, and if we think of it as people want to do good in the world, and it takes money to do these things, like these hospitals that you're talking about, and the oxygen and the programs and the serving, that takes a lot of money and it takes funding to do that. And so, if we can look at it as we are giving people an opportunity to serve in a way that maybe they can't be on the front lines doing the work in the hospitals. They're not trained, they can't travel, they can't be in those locations, whatever, but they want to make a difference on those causes. And so we are being the connector for them to help those causes that they care about. When I interviewed Bob Berg a few episodes ago, he said, we're giving them the opportunity to do something that's congruent with their values. And so that's really what this
Hmm.
is about. We are connecting these causes and missions with the funding they need to fulfill those missions. And without it, they can't do the work because it takes a lot of money to make a big impact and to do these things that you're talking about. So it's up to us to be the connectors and to help them find those funding. And a lot of it, what you mentioned too about the doctor that took someone from another hospital, a lot of it is collaboration too with others. Like maybe of one hospital you're building a relationship with that has gotten grant funding, another nearby rural hospital that hasn't. Could you partner them up to help the smaller hospital build their credibility and partner with
I
one that
see.
is well known. So sometimes collaborating instead of being afraid or feeling like, oh, we're in competition, we can't do that. How about let's work together to make both of us better and to reach more funding and more people? And, sometimes thinking creatively about that. And again, building those relationships so that you have the power to leverage and connect and help bring those resources in.
Right. That's a very good point. That's very interesting. Thank you.
All
Yes,
right.
thank you so much,
Well,
Teresa. You give me a lot of excellent ideas, a lot of things that I
good.
can
Well,
work on and think about.
good. I love your heart and I love your vision for helping these communities. So I would love to hear what are your next 2 or 3 action steps that you're going to do within the next week?
Within the next week. So I will contact the organization in Ethiopia and kind of see where they're at. And I believe there may be, changes happening. They may be actually hiring a person to work on their fundraising.
Mm-hmm.
So see, where that stands.
Mm-hmm.
And they has mentioned that they would be willing to share some of the documentation with me. So maybe like ask to receive the documentation so that I can start to see what does it look like.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and start understanding, how they're maybe, if there's budget information, start looking at that. So I think that would be one. And then I think I just have so much more learning to do on my side that, another thing, I'm going to listen to more of your podcasts and I'm going through
Yay.
more of your resources on the website.
Sure.
Um,
Yep.
and, uh, and, and there is a book that I'm reading also, kind of like a,
Mhm.
basic grant writing book. So I still feel like I'm somewhat behind in the process. So I still have a lot of learning to do.
Yep. Good. Keep learning. At the same time, keep taking action because really the two go hand in hand. It's easy to get stuck in thinking we need to keep learning more and more and more and
Mm.
feeling busy when we're not actually getting anything done. So, doing the two hand in hand is critical. Learning at the same time, but then starting to practice it. Just like if you were
Okay.
to read a book about riding a bike, yeah, you could read all day and you'd know all about riding bikes. But until you get on a bike and try to balance and pedal and get going, you're not going to learn to ride and you're not going to build up stamina and muscles to be able to ride further and further distances.
Right. That's a good point. I guess that I always had that fear of the first time. That like once
Yeah.
I break that wall, then it's a lot easier. But
We all have that. It's okay. And, I can tell you just from my own experience, fear has a way of clouding everything. So if you could remove the fear and give yourself permission to just do it imperfectly and to be new at it, you're new at this one thing, but you're not new at everything. You've done a lot of writing, you've done HR work, you've worked with organizations, you've talked to nonprofits. So you're not new. You're just new at this one extra piece. And so you give yourself permission to be new and experiment and learn as you go. And I think once you get going, you're asking such good questions. You're really thinking this through. So I think it's probably going to come pretty naturally for you. And it's okay to mess up and figure out. And like when you're working a puzzle and you think it's going to fit and one piece doesn't quite fit. So you pull that out and adjust and try a different one. So that's what you're doing. You're just trying the puzzle pieces until they click into place and then keep going.
thank you. Thank you very much
So,
for the encouragement
right.
and for the wisdom.
All right. Well, you've got this, my friend. Stay in touch and let me know how it's going. And if I can be of service in any other way, you know where to find me.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate, and I will do that.
All right. What do you think? Could you see yourself in any of the questions or situations that Sylvia and I discussed? She was unsure how to approach some of these, yet she sees such a need and really wants to serve in this way. I love her heart for wanting to help these nonprofits. And at the same time, she's looking at it very practically and very realistically of Are they ready? And we do have to analyze that. As the expert, we have to step back and have sometimes a more objective view than what they have of themselves. We have to analyze those different elements of their grant readiness, their situation, their operations, and help them see things aren't quite right in place, or you're missing some of these key pieces before you're truly ready for grants, or yeah, let's go for it. We know it's a risk, but let's try it. So sometimes they need that objective perspective from us to be able to analyze and understand that when they don't know for themselves. I would love to hear your biggest takeaways from this conversation. You can email me on my website contact form or send me a message on LinkedIn and connect over there. I love hearing from you, your thoughts, your ideas that stem from these conversations. So please reach out and go watch my TEDx talk if you haven't. Share it with a friend. If you are on the fence and wondering about this grant writing stuff, could it really be for you? Go take my free quiz at teresahuff.com/quiz. And it's called Do You Have What It Takes to Be a Grant Writer? So let's find out and let's get you moving. Just like I told Silvia, I would really love for you to take action. So the things you heard today, if there was something that inspired you, how are you going to commit to take action on it within the next 7 days? Not someday, not when I have time, not when certain things are in place and perfect, but within the next week. I want you to go take action. If you need accountability, shoot me a message and we will keep each other accountable. All right, friends, have a great week and go change your world.